Hello, everybody. This is Mr. Oliver, and I'm here to talk about more stuff that you should know for the AP test. I don't want to talk for as long as last time. Last time I talked for like an hour, and this time I'm trying to break this up into smaller little bits. Sorry about that. I dropped my microphone. Okay, let's start off by talking about the Reconquista. The Reconquista is all over and done with by 1492, the same year that Columbus sailed the ocean blue. The Spanish were essentially trying to get rid of anybody who was not their religion, who was not Catholic. This led them to drive out the Jews and the Muslims. Now, prior to the Reconquista, Spain had kind of been a hopping place. They had people of all different religions. And it was kind of coolness because you had all these people working together. Spain was really kind of super progressive back in the medieval era. Of all Europe, Spain was a big deal as far as if scientific advances, philosophical advances, stuff like that. Then they drive everybody out. This is Ferdinand and Isabella. Again, the same people that get Columbus on his merry way. And they are new monarchs that wish to do this. And ultimately, this is going to lead to the Spanish Inquisition. Because the Spanish say, like, oh, you better convert or else. And a lot of people are like, well, okay, well, we'll convert. And then the Spanish go with the, well, we don't believe you, so we are going to treat you poorly. Which is kind of a jerk move. I'm not going to lie about that. What did I say? I forgot I did this one. What did I say? I said they didn't trust people after the Reconquista. Also, no one expected the Spanish Inquisition. Basically, a lot of it was based off of racism against Jews. McKay has a quote in there. It says, essentially, there was distrust that Jews could never be anything but Jews. They were inherently Jewish and inherently out to undermine or take down the Christian religion. You couldn't trust them. So this, of course, is absurd, but it's what the Spanish believed. And they bring in the Inquisition and they torture these poor folks, and it's awful. Nothing fun there, I'm sorry. John Calvin. John Calvin is the founder of Calvinism. Now, if you didn't figure that part out, you might need to have a real talk with yourself, wherein you say like, ooh, I really should have known that. You should have. You really should have known that. He is known for his predestination. Yeah? And essentially predestination is the idea that everything in the world has already been seen by God because he is all-knowing. And therefore, if he is all-knowing, and if he is all-powerful, he knows what's going to happen to you before you're even born. So predestination has kind of a different vibe to it than maybe the Lutherans did and stuff like that. Calvin also, for the most part, Calvinism is pretty in line with Lutheranism as far as what they believe versus what the Catholics believed. And Calvin writes a book, it's called The Institutes of the Christian Religion, where he kind of seeks to standardize what it is to be a Protestant, a Protestant, someone who's protesting against the Catholic Church. One group that both Protestants and Catholics agreed that they did not like was the Anabaptists. And the poor Anabaptists, these guys, you might remember Ulrich Zwingli. I'm sure you've watched my podcast about Ulrich Zwingli. And poor Ulrich wasn't radical enough for some people in his church. He had this group that he would sit with and he'd read up on the scriptures with. But some of them were looking at the Sermon on the Mount and they were like, whoa, every single thing should be taken literally here. And so they were anti-war, they were anti-oath, they were in favor of getting re-baptized, hence Anabaptists. They were basically seen as people that even in a time where you had people protesting against the Catholic Church, that even the protesters didn't accept. The Anabaptists did appeal to some, but it was not a very huge group. One thing interesting, women were allowed to preach in church, depending on the Anabaptists. It's kind of a broad term to describe a lot of different groups, because they weren't all Swedish, of course. That's just where it started. But the rationale was that babies can't make decisions. So you can't have a baby getting baptized. It has to be done as an adult. And there are still Anabaptists in Europe and in the Americas today. It's true. So it's a thing. But back in the day, not so popular. Oliver Cromwell, jumping ahead in time a little bit, basically, when you think of your Stuart monarchs, you think of the 1600s in England. You think Elizabeth was in charge for a while, and then she died. Dead. No son. No children at all. She's the Virgin Queen. What were you thinking? How's that going to happen? It's not. So you end up with some kings. You end up with James I. Then you get Charles I. Then you have the English Civil War. And that is the Roundheads versus the Royalists. And Oliver Cromwell is the leader of the Roundhead army. And after the war, the Parliament, who sent this army to fight the king and fight against absolutism and all that, they kind of say, oh, well, so what you going to do now, Oliver? You're going to, chill out, right? You're not going to keep on killing people. And he's like, oh, no, I'm going to take over the entire country with my army and call it a protectorate. Oh, and basically, Oliver Cromwell is a Puritan. He is not known for his love of fun. He's actually anti-fun. He would make fun illegal. I think he did. Christmas was illegal. It was illegal to go to theater, wear makeup, do anything that could take away from your godly obligations. You had to have obligations to praying and whatnot. So that's Ollie Cromwell. He was not super popular, especially with the Irish, who had a revolt under him, and he went in there with his army and laid some serious smack. He really wanted to make an impression on them. He did. They still hate him today, and it's the 2000s. So mission accomplished, Oliver Cromwell. You're kind of a tool. Okay, so Thomas Hobbes is the guy that writes Leviathan. Thomas Hobbes is an English writer. He's writing after the English Civil War. He sees what happens when we don't have a strong leader in charge. And so he decides, well, we got to have a strong leader in charge. And the reason is because absolute monarchy defends us from ourself. That is to say, human beings are naturally always in a state of conflict with other man. We are selfish. We are weak. We need someone strong to guide us. Hobbes is often used as a counterpoint to John Locke. Hobbes believes humans are fundamentally bad. Locke believes that humans are fundamentally neither good nor bad. And Locke is often used as a stepping stone to some sort of democracy, although Locke himself would have been a fan of constitutional monarchy. John Locke is influential in the American Declaration of Independence because he inspires Tommy Jefferson. All right, oops, sorry about that. So Philip II of Spain is a good person to know. Philip II of Spain is the son of Charles V. Just in case you don't remember, Charles V decides to abdicate, breaks up all the Holy Roman lands. And at that time, it wasn't just the Austrian stuff, the Eastern European stuff, it was also the Netherlands and Spain. So he gives Spain and the Netherlands, basically the West side, over to Philip II, and the East goes to the Austrian Habsburgs and that is his brother, who was Ferdinand I. Philip II becomes the first of the Spanish Habsburgs, and he is mega Catholic. He actually was married at one point to Mary Tudor, who was the queen and sister of Elizabeth I. And after Mary dies, Philip is bummed out. He wants really, really badly to restore Catholicism to Europe, to kind of succeed where Dad, Charles V, had failed. And he looks at the Netherlands, and he's like, you know what, Dad? You were always soft on the Dutch. And that's partially kind of true, because Charles V, his dad, had been born in the Netherlands. So he says, all right, this is going to be where it goes down. I am going to oppress the Dutch and force them to be Catholic. Now, the Dutch were Calvinist for the most part. We would call them Huguenot, were they in France. But I think we just call them Calvinists. And as a result of this, Elizabeth I throws in her support for the Dutch. So Philip II, encouraged by the Pope in 1588, attacks the English. Hopefully, to yourself just now, you said, oh, Spanish Armada, right? Right. Spanish Armada, brother. It fails. So, also around this time, because everyone always says, like, was the Spanish Armada the end of the Dutch? Not really. I'm sorry, not the Dutch, the Spanish. Not really. The Spanish do persevere. What really hurts them more is their expansion into the New World. Because back then, precious metals were the entire basis for the economy. So when they start exporting tons and tons and tons of gold and silver, it creates, I said not so good, it creates inflation all over Europe, because you can't just say like, okay, gold is worth this amount, and there's a set amount of gold, and then all of a sudden go, oh, guess what? Here's a lot more gold. It creates problems. So, not good. Shame on you, Spain. What caused the 30 Years' War? Wow. Complicated question. 30 Years' War is caused by really two big things and one lesser thing. The French did not like the Habsburgs. They had hated the Habsburgs since the Habsburg-Valois Wars, which the Catholics in France actually supported the Protestants in the German states that were under Austrian control, or the Habsburg control in the East, because they hated the Habsburgs so much. You know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, that kind of thinking. So part of it is the French desire to hurt the Habsburgs. They hated being surrounded by Phil II over there in Spain, and then you got Ferdinand over here on the right. They didn't like having Habsburgs everywhere. So they were waiting for an excuse, and they get their excuse when some Protestants in Bohemia, which is the modern-day Czech Republic, throw some Catholic tax collectors out a window, which the proper term for that is defenestration, which really you should be using that word more. So the Bohemians end up going to war with the Catholics. France supports them. The Danes and the Swedes also jump in because they figure, well, the French are kind of paying them off for one, and they say, hey, if you help us here, we can give you some German land. And the Danes and Swedes are like, oh, it sounds good. I don't know what Danes and Swedes sound like. I'm sorry if that's not accurate. Probably the most famous Swede to come out of this is Gustavus Adolphus. And he is a Swedish king, pretty much rules for the entire 30 Years' War. Not much out of it. At the end of it all, Sweden is considered one of the great powers. Spoilers, this won't last forever. It'll actually fade away once the once the Russians defeat them in the Great Northern War, which basically wipes Sweden, not off the map, but out of the great power contention. His nickname is the Lion of the North, That's not really important, it's just awesome. Obscure alert, Jacques Bossuet. He was the court preacher to Louis XIV and a strong advocate of absolutism, that the king was God's appointed servant on earth, and you all, in turn, serve him, and that is to say the king. So everyone needs to know their role and shut their mouth. Speaking of religion, Baroque architecture. What's that? Well, it starts as part of the Catholic Counter-Reformation. The Catholic Counter-Reformation was really meant to rekindle the spirit of the common folk, and the buildings of this time period were meant to impose this sense of greatness and grandeur on behalf of the Catholic Church. Now, later on, absolute rulers will adopt the Baroque style, and it'll be, hey, we're still trying to be imposing and great and highly decorated and fancy to the highest degree, but it's not a religious thing, it's more secular. Let me give you a couple of examples here. Ooh. Ruh-roh. Okay, hold on. So, some good examples of Baroque architecture are loading. Probably the most famous would be Versailles. I really should pause it here while this loads, because internet. Here we go. Here's a couple of just examples here. See that they're big, intricate. They are beautiful, often laden with gold, fancy to a high degree. I just wanted to give you some examples here. This is on historylist.org, which is not necessarily like your greatest ever kind of thing, but like there's St. Petersburg, for example. St. Petersburg is a Baroque city, really built in the Baroque style. You could just see some examples of that. Like, look at that. That is some sweetness there. Of course, one of the... this is Mexican Baroque here at the bottom. That's not really a good example of European. The problem with this art style is that if it ain't Baroque, you shouldn't fix it. Anyway, what about 17th century Dutch paintings? This is going on around the same time as the Baroque. Whereas Baroque art is, I talked about this in a previous review, it's dark, it's dramatic. This is more realistic. Probably your two best examples are Rembrandt and Vermeer. And when you think Vermeer, you probably think of the girl with the pearl earring. Notice that the subject is not necessarily like a super important person. It's just a common person. You still got elements of the Baroque. You still got the dark background. You still got the colors that kind of pop. But the subject matter is a bit different, a bit more focused on just everyday life or interesting things in life. Rembrandt there in the upper right-hand corner is talking about, or this is called the anatomy lesson. Best thing about the anatomy lesson is, look at this. This guy's like, whoa, what's going on with this dead guy? This guy right back here is like, I just always thought that was funny. All right, that's the end of this part. I'm going to record another one of these. Have a nice day.